Thank you very much. Yes, I will be talking about older adults, depression, and cognitive training. And my talk will actually take more of a lens from the implementation science field and how technology can address the barriers that we've traditionally had with access to mental health services by underserved populations like older adults. So why is it important to focus on older adults? This is a rapidly growing demographic globally where cognitive impairments have a significant economic impact on society. And although mental health is not as prevalent in younger adults, the cost of mental illness is extensive in the geriatric population in terms of all cause health concerns and costs, demands on family, and because of the negative impact that cognitive dysfunction has on well-being and functioning in this population. And while we have effective treatments for depression, for instance, in older adults, access is pretty poor. Technology, however, has a real potential for increasing older adult access to mental health services. And as you can see from a number of studies, including the Pew Charitable Trust Foundation technology studies, older adults use the internet as much as younger adults do, and over half are smartphone owners. Although technology tends to be less available in minority populations, that number is growing, including older minorities. There is a strong interest in using technology for health and mental health in this population. However, there are strong preferences for the type of technology. For instance, in a recent study we found that older adults, when asked would they be interested in text messaging as a way to contact their physicians or mental health providers, this was seen as a very unpopular mode of technology. However, if we go to the next slide, it's interesting that I think a lot of people will be very surprised that video games is actually a very popular type of technology for older adults. In a study done in 2020 found that 23% of all gamers were over the age of 50. And what I mean by gamers is a very specific definition. These are people who regularly play video games. They do it daily. It is one of their primary main forms of entertainment. And 44% of older adults play video games on a regular basis. However, there is a preference for the type of video games that they play. They're not less likely to play, for instance, first shooter programs and so forth, but they're very interested in puzzles and brain challenges. And again, too, my interest is in underserved populations. About 40% of older minorities believe that brain games are important for brain health. Next slide. So I had actually recognized this trend very early in my career when I was at UCSF, and we have a number of people there at UCSF who are very interested in the use of gaming technologies to improve cognition. And so in working with Adam Ghazali's lab, I had become interested in Project Endeavor. At the time, it was NeuroRacer. It was a very early prototype. But Dr. Ghazali and I had been talking about the challenges that I was facing with increasing access to mental health services for older adults. I had just completed a study demonstrating that a psychosocial intervention called problem-solving treatment was particularly effective for treating depression in older adults, in particular, older adults with a specific type of cognitive deficit. Next slide. In fact, there have been decades of research, particularly from my colleagues at Cornell University and at UPMC, that found that older adults with cognitive control deficits and depression tended to have a very brittle response to medication-oriented treatment for depression, in particular SSRIs, and very in particular escitalopram. Preliminary evidence from Dr. Ghazali's group had shown that older adults who played immersive gamification of multitasking programs demonstrated improved cognitive control. And this was published as a seminal paper in Nature in 2013. I had become very interested in the fact that this game could have such a positive impact on the very deficit that I was interested in studying, with no anticipation that this would have an impact on mood. However, Adam and I decided to do a head-to-head comparison of problem-solving treatment with to his game, and found in 2 studies that we've been able to show not only do older adults with major depression and cognitive control deficits have improved cognitive control, but this improvement seemed to be implicated in improvement in depression in older adults. I'm going to also talk about some of the findings that we've had in younger adults. Next slide. So one of the things that's really exciting, it's not so much that this is an intervention that has a lot of that can impart neuroplasticity in this geriatric population with depression, but it's a really easy intervention to implement. So it's very much like a medication wellness visit. Basically, the way it works is that the first session with the older person is spent just teaching them how to play the video game. And so the therapist will sit down, have them do a trial run of the game on the tablet. Everything from with older adults who are maybe a little bit more technology anxious, showing them how to turn the iPad on, where to touch the screen, the fact that they're not going to do anything to break the game, how to take care of the iPad. And with the more technology savvy older adults, just kind of jumping right into like, this is how you play the video game, so that the person has some practice. And then in the follow-up sessions, we're finding it's actually a very brief encounter. There's about 10 minutes in game review. So the therapist actually has an opportunity to see how often the participant or the patient has used the video game, what their success rate looks like over time, how many stars or points do they earn in the game, are they leveling up in the game? And then there's about 10 to 15 minutes in support. And what we found over time is that the benefit for this video game is so positive early on that there's very little that the therapist and the patient really have to talk about, other than like, how's it going with the rest of your life? Are you finding time to play the game? And people reporting that they're actually having a very positive impact from this. Next slide. So the outcomes so far, as I mentioned, is that there's a very strong benefit for this video game and proof of concept studies for depression compared to evidence-based therapies. There's a strong benefit for cognition with evidence for near and far transfer. And what I mean by that is that not only have we measured the impact of this video game in older adults with depression on tasks that are similar to what they play in the game, but also to tasks that are related to attention and distraction that are not at all like the game. And we've also found some preliminary signature in fMRI showing that there are improvements in seated areas of the brain that are related to cognitive control in this population. But the gold ring really is, how do they feel? Do they feel less depressed? And that is the ultimate far transfer result, which is that we have very positive outcomes on depression. Not only that, we have found that older adults who play this game have 100% adherence to playing the game, which is unheard of. And because of COVID, during one of our studies, we found that this is actually very effective to be delivered remotely. Next slide. This is a study that we conducted a couple of years ago, where we were mostly interested in determining whether or not we can do randomized clinical trials over completely remotely, like over the internet and through people's smartphones. But it's a really good example of how much reach you can get with the therapeutic video games, as well as other digital mental health offerings. In this study, in the matter of 5 weeks, we were able to screen 7,000 people and enroll 4,000 people in this study. Next slide. And in this study, what happened is that people would find the ad, they would enter the project. They would agree to provide 12 weeks of daily and weekly data on their mood and functioning, and were randomized between Project Endeavor, a digital mental health app based on problem-solving treatment, and then a control called Health Tips. It was literally just every day you got a little suggestion about what you could do to improve your mood. Next slide. And just to kind of show you that we were able to reach a very demographically diverse population in the United States. In fact, our sample was almost identical to what you would see in the US Census. Next slide. And the outcomes were very promising too. Interestingly, if people with lower scores of depression, PHQ-9s between 5 and 10, you could give them anything and they would feel better over time. However, people with much more significant depression with scores, PHQ scores of 15 and greater, seem to have much greater benefit for the intervention-based apps, in particular for Project Endeavor, which had a very significant impact on functional disability as measured by a version of the Sheehan Disability Assessment Scale that we developed to be delivered online. Next slide. But then we also show that we were able to, one of the challenges here is that there was no coaching involved in this study. However, people were actually very adherent to using the video game more so than they were for the psychotherapy or the app based on a psychotherapy. And so, again, this is like evidence that this is an acceptable intervention. A lot of people can access it. It has the potential to improve cognition globally because of its ability for reach, as well as for older adults. Next slide. And now I'll hand it over to Elena Cañadas.